You are listening to the Mark Guzman Podcast Experience. Our guest today is Ryan Meyer, a man of many talents who lately has honed his skills in the world of nutrition. A one-time tattoo artist and a nightclub promoter, Ryan now works as a certified holistic nutritionist as well as a National Strength and Conditioning Association certified personal trainer. Today we will get to know Ryan, learn about his business, and talk about the importance of a high nutrition lifestyle. Hopefully you can take something away from this episode that you can in turn use in your own diet. All right, so before we get into the podcast, I have to apologize because a small chunk at the beginning did not record. I'm not sure what happened, but let's just call it possible user error on my part. Where the podcast begins, Ryan is currently explaining his background story and how it led into his current occupation. Ryan is local to the Bay Area and raised in Alameda, California. Growing up, he fell in love with tattoos at the age of 10 when he saw a guy with arm sleeves. A few years later, in his early teens, he got his first tattoo and his mother was not happy. But this eventually led him to become a tattoo artist where he opened up a shop in Hayward, California. In his early 20s, he had a child, and to make additional money, he helped work security as a bouncer at a nightclub in Mountain View, California. This led his transition from being a tattoo artist to a club promoter. And this is where we will begin the podcast.
Married, had a brand new kid, needed the extra money. I think part of me was just looking for an excuse to get out of the house as well. And my brother-in-law at the time was working security at this club in Mountain View and asked me if I'd be interested in working and making some extra money. And so I started working as a security guard, a bouncer, and totally fell in love with just the social aspect of the industry, and worked my way up into a head of security position and then into a management position. And eventually just kind of realized, like, looking at the promoters, these guys are coming in and drinking and partying and having a blast and making 4 or 5 times the money that I was making. It was like, yeah, I want to be that guy, And at the time, this was before social media and everybody was a Facebook party promoter or host. You actually had to get out there, and it was who you knew and how hard you worked and flyers and the whole nine. I just realized I'd give it, I'm going to give this a chance, give it a shot. I did my birthday party one year at the club I worked at. It was like on a Wednesday night and had a huge success with it. And it just kind of rolled from there. And before I knew it, I was a full-time nightclub promoter making a living partying. It was awesome.
Living every young guy's dream, right?
Yeah, I was basically out 4 or 5 nights a week, and all I did was just party and got paid to do it. But it ended up leading to a very unhealthy lifestyle. I was drinking 4 or 5 nights a week. I was eating horribly, sleep all day, party all night, recreational drug use involved. I mean, it was just like living that dream, and I ended up about 100 pounds overweight.
Wow.
Just super unhealthy, full of anxiety, major digestive issues. Like, this is all stuff that became my norm. And that's essentially what kind of transitioned me into the health and fitness world, to be honest.
Okay. So let's talk about that transition. How did you go from those prior occupations to nutrition?
So there's a couple parts to this. The first part was just purely egotistical, like I didn't want to be fat, I wanted to be lean. I was, at this point in time, I was going to Vegas, Sunday through Wednesday. I'd go to Vegas once a month. In the summertime, sometimes twice. Could never take my shirt off at the pool, was always really self-conscious about how I looked. So in that aspect, I was constantly looking for a fix there. So I would, go on starvation diets. I'd cut carbs. I, kind of started exercising a little bit, was trying to find ways to lose weight. So that was an ongoing battle for quite a while. And I would fluctuate up and down a little bit. And then the really big turning point for me was when I started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's kind of a long story how I ended up falling into that. my son was living with me at the time. He was 12 years old and having some problems, so his mom sent him to live with me, and so I figured I wanted to put him into something that would uh, keep him busy. Can use the energy, give him a little bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Discipline. And
Hmm.
he said he'd only do it if I did it with him, and the rest was history. I mean, I fell in love with it. A month later, he didn't want to go anymore, and I was like hooked.
Yeah.
And so I started realizing that when I was partying during the week or on the weekends, that I wouldn't make it to train, and I didn't feel good, and I didn't have the energy, and so training became more important to me than being out late on a weeknight or what have you. And so that slowly started to taper that lifestyle down. Um, and then it came to a point where I was like, man, I think I want to compete and start doing jujitsu competitions. And at this time, I mean, I was still 220 plus 230 pounds. I think I lost a good 25 pounds when I started just training. But I was still kind of in that heavyweight bracket if I wanted to compete, which means that I would have to go against, there was no cap on the weight limit after that. If I would be going against guys that are 260, 270, and
Hmm.
that wasn't something that really intrigued me. And I remember telling my coach, I'll never forget this. I said to him, I don't want to compete that heavy. And he's like, well, why don't lose more weight and get into a lower weight bracket? And I remember telling him, I don't think I can lose more weight. I think this is just where I'm at. No matter what I do, I can't get any leaner. And he's like, can you see your abs? And I said, no. And he's like, then you can get leaner. And at this point in my life, I had never seen abs on my body. My entire life, I was 33, 34 years old and just kind of thought that was it. But that him making that comment to me really resonated with me, and I was like, there's got to be more to this. You see all these guys in the magazines or on social media, and they've got their big picture, and then they're like ripped. Like there's got to be a way to get there, and I became obsessed with figuring that out, and that led into my own research into nutrition, and I knew that eating had a lot to do with it, and I just didn't know how to do it right, and like there's so many fad diets out there and myths out there and BS out there. It was kind of like, okay, that is what really drove my obsession, I would call it. Anybody who becomes a nutritionist has to be obsessed. That the obsession with finding the truth, and that's really where it all began.
Okay. Now you're a certified holistic nutritionist. Now explain that a little bit more, what that means, the education requirements, and how does that differ from like dietitians and other nutritionists?
So, holistic nutrition is, I guess, the easiest way to explain it would be therapeutic nutrition. Um, Registered dietitian is more of a your typical 4-year college education into nutrition. Whereas holistic nutrition, I would say, would maybe even have more of an Eastern medicine type approach if I was to kind of break it down. The 4-year college registered dietitian approach is very heavily influenced on food pyramid, big food, big pharma. And when that's influencing nutrition, you're not always going to get the truth. When they're recommending like 7 to 8 servings of cereal grains a day, it's kind
Hmm.
of, okay, well, there's vested interests there. I won't get that deep into it, but a lot of that side of nutrition is looking at kind of the macronutrient, looking at the protein, fat, carb, calorie side of the fence. Whereas holistic nutrition, we're looking more at the micro nutrients. So we're looking at vitamins, minerals, cell health. Somebody's got cancer, inflammation, diabetes. How do we deal with that? Much more organic, holistic approach to eating. And when I originally was choosing to go to school, I didn't know what holistic nutrition was. I didn't choose that on purpose. I was actually very torn because I felt like I needed the 4-year education because as a registered dietitian, I'd be able to work in a hospital. I would have potentially a bachelor's degree, which would make me legit versus this holistic nutrition program, which is just a certificate program. I was really torn on that. And my gut instinct just kept pushing me back towards Bowman College in Berkeley, which I attended. There's just a ton of street cred that place has in the community of nutrition. And so I ended up deciding to go that route. And I'll never forget the first day of class sitting there. And here I am, this like fitness dude, because I'd already done a lot of my own research, and I knew a lot going into it. And here I am, like this fitness dude, like thinking I'm going to learn how to get lean and make people ripped and work with athletes. And I had this whole grandiose vision of what I was going to be and do. And I'm in a class full of all women. I was the only guy in the class, and everybody there was just like, they either had some sort of medical issue going on, or they already knew why they were there. And I'm like, what did I get myself into? Organic this and hippie this and hippie that. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be awful. And I ended up just falling in love with the program. And that is, I mean, that's where my belief system lies. And what makes me unique as well is I'm able to take that holistic education and merge it with kind of the fitness performance side of the fence. And it makes a great marriage, to be honest.
Yeah, and in your opinion, what percentage of losing weight does diet play in?
Diet's everything. It's funny, people say, oh, it's 80% nutrition and 20% exercise. I would push it much further than that. I could almost say it's 99%. It's funny. A couple of years back, I've done a lot of experimenting with my own body on this journey. Aside from losing 100 pounds, just kind of like, how lean can I get, and how quickly will I put on weight? And a couple of years ago, right before the holidays, I got down to about 4.9% body fat. Super.
Wow.
I felt awful, by the way. No athlete should ever be that low, but I just did it to do it and experience it. And I decided going into the holidays, I was going to eat freely for, I think it was about 3 weeks. I'm just going to eat whatever I want, as much as I want, but I'm not going to change my training regimen. I continued to train jujitsu about 6 times a week. I was doing functional, like hardcore HIIT training and functional training 3 days a week. I was running up in the Berkeley Hills, 5+ miles twice a week. Nothing changed but my diet. And I actually put like 9 pounds on of body fat, still training that way, but just eating in abundance. And that proved right there to me that you cannot out-train a poor diet. Diet is key.
Yeah. And it's funny. So going back to the dietitians in school and the heavy influence from pharma and various other industries,
Sure.
it's very interesting because I've spoken to a few doctors, and even the doctors admit themselves that they don't get much training when it comes to diet. And
No,
one of the biggest problems is when people are having issues and they're at the doctor, one of the questions that doctors should ask is, well, what's your diet like? And that's a question that's rarely asked by physicians. And so,
absolutely.
yeah, and so there's a huge trend now of people really looking at diet and really looking outside. So, for someone who's looking to lose some weight, where should they start looking at first?
Well, so that's such an easy and complicated question at the same time. The first thing they have to, I mean, obviously they have to look within their diet. I mean, that's kind of the obvious answer. Now, there can be people out there that have thyroid issues, and there can be other things that come into play. So I really hate pushing just the calories in, calories out, because that's not always the case. But I would say it's 98% the case. And a majority the majority of the mistakes that people are making with their diet or with consuming too many calories are the processed foods, consumption of alcohol. There's always a lot of little things, and people don't realize how many calories they're eating.
That would probably be the biggest problem with the American diet today, right?
Biggest problem with the standard American diet, aside from low quality, that's a whole nother rabbit hole, talking about low quality meats and what have you. But yes, processed foods, way too many calories in the diet, way too many refined foods. People are getting a ton of calories and hardly any nutrition, right? You think about a pasta or bread or anything, chips, tons of calories, not many vitamins or minerals or nutrients. So the body is starving essentially, not starving of calories, but starving of nutrition. And then all kinds of things go wrong. You've got food addiction issues, reward center pathways of the brain that are being stimulated by these foods. It's another rabbit hole. It's a big mess. It's a huge problem.
Now, is there something, in your opinion, that is currently right about the standard American diet? Something that people should keep doing?
Standard American diet, or as like we used to say in school, stands for SAD. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of positive things I can say about the standard American diet. It's kind of everything in abundance, and that's, yeah, processed. Everything's processed. How fast and how convenient and how cheap is the food? And then you've got government subsidies that subsidize, corn and wheat and soy, and that's why farmers continue to grow these things. I think that it's like something like less than 5% of government subsidies actually goes to fruit and vegetables, something crazy like
Wow.
that. And so what happens is these crops get put into everything. I mean, everything has sugar in it. Everything has corn syrup in it. It goes in our vitamins. It goes into shampoo. It goes into soap. I mean, any way that they can get rid of it. And yeah, it's a huge problem. Not to mention that, the factoring these crops on a large scale, especially non-organically, is destroying the planet. It's destroying the earth. It's destroying the soil. The soil ends up becoming completely infertile and lacks no natural mineral resources anymore, and nothing will grow in it anymore. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of dead land in this country that nothing will grow on anymore because of the factory farming of these crops.
Yeah, and yeah, I was watching a documentary the other day, and they were talking about how to get some of this land regrown again.
Hmm.
And there's a complete process, and they literally have to plant so many vegetables over and over and over again, and just kind of waste everything, basically just to get the soil back to its original condition. But that's also very costly, and so many times they just don't do anything.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and the other answer to that is animals. I mean, for millennia, animals and the farming of animals and crops together, it was a practice. I mean, that it goes back centuries. And once we've removed animals and our vegetation separately, is when problems have been, created, right? And so that's really kind of an easy fix, is going back to where we were 300, 400, or 500 years ago. The animals eat the grass, they poop, that's kind of regenerates the soil. There is a way to do it, and there is a process. But we just need to get back to it. We need to
Yeah,
get back to our roots, man. I mean, that's really what it's all about.
yeah,
The mass production of food is where things have started going wrong.
yeah. And probably the cheap mass production of food.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah. How do we do it the cheapest? How do we feed the most people for cheap? I mean, it's still amazing to me how you can buy a bag of bread that's in a bag, that's printed, that came in a truck across the country, full tank of gas. How many tanks of gas? Pay the guy to drive it. Think about the warehouse that all this was processed through. The bags were made, the bread was made. I mean, all the workers involved. Think about that. And you can get that bag of bread for cheaper than an apple grown locally. I mean, there's something really wrong with that.
yeah, yeah. Now let's talk about some fad diets, because
Sure.
there's a lot of diets out there that you see trends, they get very popular.
Yeah.
The low carb diet, Atkins, just a whole variety. I mean, I've seen like the chocolate diet. There's in fact, I heard one that was like a hot dog diet, like just some
Yeah,
crazy ones out there. So,
totally.
so I would assume number one is stay away from all these fad diets, right?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. It's, fad diets I think are intriguing to people because everybody wants an easy fix, everybody wants a quick fix. Everybody wants to have their cake and eat it too, right? Like, oh, well then that must be my problem, or I can still have what I want, and it's just instead of just getting back to good healthy eating, right? So I think that's where people are drawn to these kind of diets. Of course, some of them there's concerns with, like I'm looking at a holistic level, like how well nourished and the quality of the food and all that kind of stuff. That's a whole nother problem. But one thing that all fad diets have in common is calorie restriction. And that's really what it comes down to. If you restrict calories in versus calories out, you're going to lose weight. I mean, that's just it. The problem is that a lot of these fad diets, they're not sustainable. This is something that will work. It's a quick fix. You lose weight, but then what? If you have addiction to processed foods, and you lose a bunch of weight, eventually that hormone dysregulation your body's going to say, okay, I'm starving now. I lost way too much weight too fast. Your metabolism will start to slow. Your hunger hormones will start to elevate. This is all like survival mode for the body will kick in, right? It's how we've evolved over all of these years, and we will become ravenous and we'll go right back to our old bad habits. So there's not really any sustainability there at the fad diets. The other thing is like poor understanding. You mentioned like Atkins or low carb. Now the whole ketogenic thing is like everybody's keto, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not that I necessarily have anything against keto, but the reality is that people who don't have a deep understanding of nutrition have no idea what they're doing. The idea of the body transitioning to burning fat for energy, on the surface, it's like, oh, wow, if my body's using fat for energy, then I'm burning my fat. Well, no, your body's using the fat that you eat as energy. It's not using the fat on your body. If you're still eating too many calories, nothing's going to change. Or people go low carb, and then what happens is the body starts using up all of its glycogen stores. So you lose weight. Glycogen's emptied. All of a sudden, I lost 15 pounds. Oh my God, this is awesome. And then it's not working anymore. So I think that's really the biggest issue with fad is quality, poor understanding of the science, or it's just not sustainable.
Yeah. And now when you talk about carbs and fats and proteins,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that simple. I mean, there's a deeper level to each of those, correct? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
fats, you have saturated, you have mono, polysaturated fats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it gets a lot more complex, and each of those affect your body in a completely different way.
Absolutely. And then we need them all. They're all important. But then there's a poor understanding of what those fats mean and what's a quality source and what's not. Saturated fats are totally demonized. But naturally occurring saturated fat from a high quality source, such as animal fat, is probably one of the most healthy fats on the planet that we can get. If it comes from a high quality animal, it's loaded with omega-3 essential fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory. It's loaded with fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin D, vitamin E, right? And then you've also got the fact that it's saturated is what protects it from oxidation. Oxidized fats are one of the biggest causes or largest causes of low-grade inflammation in the body that lead to disease. So like vegetable oils are probably one of the worst things that we can ingest. One of my teachers used to call it like the white bread of the fat world because it's basically been stripped from its whole source. Let's take avocado oil. There's a lot of hype on that right now. Well, avocados are super healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of good nutrition, good fats, right? A lot of good fat soluble vitamins. But when you strip everything away and all you're left with is an oil, there's nothing left. And then there's nothing to protect that oil from oxidation, which is basically like oxidation is just like rusting metal in a sense. And light and heat and air are what oxidize anything, including metal, including oil, including our insides in our body. So yeah, having a poor understanding of fats is a problem for sure.
Yeah, and if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you also have to supplement with vitamins and minerals that you don't get from animal meat, such as vitamin D and B, right?
So B12
B12.
is the biggest one. Yeah, B12 is a vitamin that you're only going to get from your high quality animal sources. Now, if we start talking about factory farmed animals that are eating grains, corn, soy, it's a completely different story, right? Because these animals are not being fed a proper diet. They're not being fed a nutrient dense diet. And if they can't extract the nutrients in their diet, it's not going to translate to them.
Okay,
But
that's a very interesting point right there because there's also a big trend of especially with the Netflix movies coming out. What the health, forks over knives. There's a lot of people moving toward vegan, vegetarian, and giving that a shot, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And there's a whole argument that, well, you can't get your vitamins that you need being
right,
vegan or vegetarian, but at the same time, there's a lot of people on a standard American diet eating a lot of red meat that
sure.
also are malnutrition when it comes to vitamins.
Oh
And
yeah.
it comes down to the quality of the meat that they're eating, right?
Absolutely. Nutrition in general comes down to, it all comes down to quality and balance, how much you're eating of each, right? I mean, the reality is that human beings have been eating meat and evolving for over 100,000 years. All of a sudden now we're seeing heart disease, we're seeing cancer, and all of these obesity epidemics. It's just happening in the last 100 years, since World War II, basically. So to now all of a sudden demonize meat and say it's the problem, it's like, come on, you know what I mean? Like, the factory farming of animals is where things have started going wrong. Once we started feeding them corn, soy, wheat, we started locking them up, giving them no exercise, not exposing them to the sun, stressing them out. Now we've got problems. But yeah, quality is everything. You hit that one on the head.
Okay, and then carbs.
Hmm.
And carbs are not always the same either, right? And
No.
then and now one of the things that confuses a lot of people when it comes to diet is when they're reading the package, they see dietary fiber, they have sugar in the same category, and then
Hmm.
there's sometimes the numbers don't add up. What's the difference there?
Well, so as far as total carbohydrate, when you're looking at a packaged food, is a combination of usable carbohydrate, which is essentially your starch, your sugar. What usable means is that it's going to turn into glucose in the blood. Your body is going to take that carbohydrate and turn it into sugar. Non-usable carb is your fiber. So if you add your sugar and you add your fiber together, you get total carbohydrate. It's the way that United States FDA makes uh, certain. It's the way that it has to be labeled. Basically, fiber and usable carb have to be added together as your total carbohydrate.
Okay.
So yeah, that's where that can be a little bit confusing.
Okay. And so I know diets play a huge part in regulating hormone levels, correct?
Oh yeah.
Now, how does a proper nutrition, how can that actually help hormone levels? What happens in the body when you're taking in the proper nutritions?
Well, everything is in balance. That's really what it comes down to is when I guess the best way I can just, so first of all, hormonal reactions, there's tons of them. Okay. Everything from what tells us we're hungry to what tells us we're full, how our blood sugar is regulated, our mood, everything is this hormonal reaction, right? Now, these hormonal reactions, in order to work properly, all work off a certain sequence of nutrients. They work off of proteins. They work off of different vitamins, different minerals. Okay. A perfect example of that, totally simplified, is our heartbeat. Okay. Calcium causes the contraction. Magnesium is when it relaxes. Calcium, magnesium. I mean, so that's just a really simple breakdown. Okay.
Okay.
So of how things work in the body. So hormones, same thing. Different nutrients are needed. Well, what happens when we're malnourished? The body is going to always want it's survival first. So certain things will be shut down or will take a back seat, I guess is the best way for me to describe that. And so if certain nutrients are needed in a more important area of the body will have to sacrifice proper hormonal regulation, right? Same thing with the bones. People start losing bone density because of a lack of nutrients in their body, because there's other things that need to be sacrificed. Or sometimes the body will actually take nutrients. Like we store a lot of minerals in our bones. The body will actually pull those minerals out of the bones and use them for other things to survive. Same with the organs, you name it. So that's the simplest way I can describe why we can fall so easily out of balance, hormonal balance, and we start getting sick.
Now, is that one of the reasons why alcohol is extremely toxic for your body, in that when you drink alcohol, it's actually taking your liver function away from regulating certain hormones in your body.
Oh yeah, I mean it goes deeper than that, but yeah, what happens when we drink alcohol is everything else stops, right? From metabolism of food to where nutrients and certain antioxidants in the body are going to be used. Um, we actually make an extremely powerful antioxidant called glutathione, which we need for all sorts of different function. And then, of course, like you said, you've got liver function. As soon as you ingest alcohol, everything else stops. The body sees this as a huge danger, and glutathione gets 100% used to go deal with that threat. Different nutrients get used for that threat. The liver stops everything else to deal with that threat. It just essentially robs your body of, and your cells, I should say, of essential nutrients that are needed for other things. So yeah, and metabolism wise, it's the body will metabolize alcohol before anything else. So you go and eat a big meal and you have a couple glasses of wine. Well, guess what? The wine's going to be dealt with, and that food's going to be stored. So that's another reason people tend to gain a lot more weight when they drink alcohol.
Wow, did not know
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The body will always deal with that threat first.
Usually on the podcast, I'm always sharing a glass of wine with a guest. I'm gonna have to rethink that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things. I mean, I personally don't drink. I always tell people, if you're going to drink, red wine, an organic red wine is probably your best bet, just because there is some nutritional benefit in the sense that there are polyphenols, which are antioxidants. Same thing that's found in like green tea, but those same polyphenols they come from the grapes. It's not the wine itself that makes it any fancier or better. But at the same time, you're still dealing with the negative effects as well.
So it might be better just to go buy a bag of grapes and eat that instead, right?
You get the same benefit. Yeah.
Okay, so when working with clients,
hmm
how does your business work? And when they come to consult with you, how does that process begin?
Well, I have my own take on how I deal with clients. I mean, first of all, it kind of depends on what they've got going on or what issues they may be dealing with. I do deal with people who just want to lose weight. That's really common. Increase athletic performance, or then I do have a lot of clients that have issues like diabetes, cancer, cholesterol issues, like you name it. So my approach is always going to be tailored to what their specific needs are. But one thing that's always the same is it's always a high quality diet of high quality foods, nothing processed, no alcohol. If it comes in a bag, if it has ingredients, don't eat it. I always strip everything down to the most basic level. And the reason is, number one, you're going to get the best results that way, and people want results. Number two, it covers food addiction issues. If you're continuing to introduce processed foods or sugars or alcohols or things into your diet, you continue to hit this reward center pathway of the brain, and that can be totally problematic and throw people off and drives people to failure, I would say, right? So it's about breaking those bad habits. And the last and most important thing for me is getting people to reconnect with their food. There's a huge disconnect in our modern society from the food that we eat. Looking at the quality, where it came from, where was it grown, whose hands did it pass through? Was this a quality animal? What was this animal's life like? So getting people to stop and actually think about what they're buying and where they're buying it, where it came from, I think is huge. Just kind of slow things down a little bit. And then another huge disconnect I have to mention is just kind of the price of food. We've gotten to a point where, in this society, we'd rather have the new iPhone and drive a BMW and have these new pair of shoes and not spend money on high quality food. And so I try to kind of reel people back into finding a realistic budget, to spend on high quality food. Pay the farmer or the butcher before you pay the doctor. And so that's really my whole approach. Other than that, I don't meal plan for people. I don't tell people how much they can eat or how much they can't eat. I don't tell people what time to eat. All I do is basically say, here's a list of the foods you can eat. This is how I want you to balance them in proportion to each other, not in total. Figure out the rest. And the reality is I found that people over the course of the first 30 or 40 days that really embrace the process, they hate me for the first week or two because it's like, oh my God, this is just so different from what I'm used to. But if they follow the rules by the end of the 30 days, they're just like, dude, I've got this down. Like I know where I buy this. I know where I buy that. This is how I snack during the day. This is how I make it work with my life. Because the reality is that first of all, the human body is not binary. It's the least binary thing in the world. There is no cookie cutter way to nutrition or what works for everybody. And that goes the same for our lifestyles. Some people are home all day and they love to cook. That's the easiest client. But then I get these like working types that work 10 hours a day and they don't have time for anything. So making that man or woman stop their life to figure out when they're going to shop and how they're going to cook and how they're going to make sure they eat healthy throughout the day, that person is going to need to figure it out on their own. And that's where I've seen the most success with lifestyle change is when people actually develop a way to do it that works for them. And they're not on some fad diet or the Whole30 or the whole this that's telling them this is how you have to do it. Because if it doesn't work for them or their personality, their lifestyle, they'll never continue on. Mm-hmm. So, and that's how I kind of map things out. And then I take on the role of coach. Once I've laid it all out, now I'm your coach, right? Now you reach out to me. You have questions, concerns, you're struggling, things are getting hard, you don't know what to do, you're whatever. Then I'm able to coach them through it because I've been through it all myself, or I've dealt with enough clients that I always have an idea of how to be successful.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's a completely different approach to most nutritionist diet coaches that simply give you a meal plan, tell you to follow this, eat this. Yep. It's basically a cookie cutter that they can put together. Yeah, so that's a very interesting concept. Now, as far as buying food, are there any like grocery stores that you recommend to really focus around, or is something where people really just have to do the research and kind of maybe shop around at few stores to find that quality food?
Yeah, that's part of it. You hit the nail on the head there with people figuring it out. So there are a few things that that's part of the discovery process. There are a few places and a few things that I always recommend right off the bat. One is farmers markets. I think it's just so important that we support our local farmer and our local economy. Okay, it's huge. And also, these foods haven't been passed through a bunch of hands. They haven't been picked prematurely. Most of that stuff's been picked that morning and is fresh. Fruits and vegetables actually, they decrease in their nutritional value the longer they're off the vine. They're decreased in nutritional value if they're picked prematurely. So by going to a farmer's market, you ensure good, fresh produce, and it's usually cheaper. As far as meat is concerned, there's only really one place that I recommend to everybody, and that is SF Raw, San Francisco Raw in San Francisco. The owner, Casey, is a vegan, believe it or not, a vegan meat dealer. Can you believe it? She started actually doing raw dog food grinds and raw pet treats, which is a whole other story, but that's how I found her actually. And she's just got a very deep love for animals and compassion. And so she only carries meats that come from the highest quality sources, where these farmers are raising them well, providing the proper diets, and actually trying to give back to the planet in a positive way. So I like to send people there because I believe in everything she's doing, and it's a one-stop shop. You can go in there and get anything from a steak to fish to exotic meats, elk, venison. She's got duck eggs, she's got everything. So those are usually kind of the staples I give people to start with, and then encourage them to search on their own from there and find places that can provide the same quality and the best price for them and convenience. Because again, that's huge. It's got to be convenient for people. It's got to work for people, right? Or else it's not going to be sustainable. So yeah.
Okay. Now mentioned a few minutes ago about a reward system. Now, cheat meals. How do you feel about cheat
Mm-hmm.
meals?
Oh, I love this topic. So cheat meals are something that I think destroy. So let me say this, 100%, no, 98% of the people out there that are unable to lose weight and don't understand why, if they don't have a medical issue, is because of their cheat day. Um, Again, calories in, calories out. Okay. The best way I can paint this picture is you put yourself in a 500 calorie a day deficit. Let's say you're really good all week long. You work out, you eat well. And then Sunday comes and you let loose a little bit and you have a couple beers or a couple of cocktails and you share a big dinner. Or I like to use In-N-Out a lot. You have a double animal fry and a large shake. Well, you just, let's see, even add a couple beers to that. You just pounded about 3,000 calories. Okay, that's pretty much your deficit for the week you've just replaced. So you're breaking even. Why am I breaking even? Why can't I lose? Because of your cheat day, period. So I'm not a fan of cheat meals at all. Do I see any benefit to them? No. There is no benefit. Sometimes you read these articles that'll say, oh, when you've been in a calorie deficit for this long and having a cheat meal can actually upregulate the metabolism and set the hormones back in balance and all of that.
I've heard that before.
Okay, so there is something to that, but doesn't mean it has to be a junky meal. I mean, you could literally increase your healthy macro if you're counting your calories. I mean, you could just increase 300 or 400 calories of steak or brown rice or something and have the same benefit. It's more, you know what I mean? It doesn't need to be junk per se. So when it comes to weight loss, I think cheat meals are the biggest thing that hinder people's loss. It's not good for you, period, at the cellular level. And then, like I said, the reward pathways. So there's the reward centers of the brain that are triggered. I think that food addiction is what plagues is the hugest plague in our society these days, from our children to us. We are addicted, man. We are drinking the Kool-Aid. We are addicted to refined carbohydrate. We are addicted to sugar. Alcohol as well kind of plays somewhat of the same role in the body. And people will say, oh, I'm not addicted to those things, till you tell them they can't. If I tell you you can't eat bread, you're going to stress out a little bit. People are like, what? My bread? The reality is that like they're extremely addictive. And the way that the reward pathway that I'm mentioning is how we've survived for years. When we eat something that we enjoy and that triggers the reward center of our brain, we create this pathway to bring us back to it. It's the same way that an animal in the wild knows where to find water or knows where its that it left, is because the brain will remember how to get there. That's survival. It's the same thing with the foods that we eat. It's just enhanced when it's refined, when it's sugar, starch. Caffeine enhances these, and alcohol enhances this as well. And that's why we have such a hard time staying away from these foods. That and wheat and refined grains have opiate type properties as well. So our body is unhappy with these foods. They typically create an immune response in the body. And then we have this opiate type release where we get kind of this high from it. And that's what we're chasing. I call it the off factor. Any food that makes you go, oh man, that was hella good, and that hit the spot, is probably not a good thing. Because real food won't do that. You know what I mean? And when you first go into a program where I put people on these whole foods diet and I remove everything processed, that's the one thing they're chasing, is that off factor. That's the one thing they're addicted to. And what's going to give you that off factor? Your bread, your sugar, your pasta, your beer, your glass of wine. And when you're not getting that, we feel lost without it. That's our comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you're working on launching a podcast, and you're also working on a documentary, correct?
Yes. So the podcast is kind of on hold for now. It was something my dream as far as being a nutrition professional has been to kind of educate on a larger scale, like being a clinical nutritionist and seeing day-to-day clients is not something that totally excites me. I'm saying that publicly. I don't mind it, but it's not, it's not my favorite thing. I realized that really early on. But having a wide audience is. So that's where the idea of the podcast was exciting. But I've just been so busy building my personal training business and with the clients I do have, I haven't really had the time to dedicate to that. But I plan to pick it back up. And I'm hoping that this documentary will be the segue to that. The documentary is really my new passion. And I'm totally getting to a point to dedicate my entire life to this project. It's essentially going to be about eating meat. I mean, should we eat meat or not is kind of the premise of it. And it's not that I'm going to answer that question in this documentary because I think it's up to the individual, but this is going to be an answer to What the Health or Forks Over Knives, especially What the Health. Boy, that documentary upset me, just so much bad science and bias and leading people down the wrong path. And I feel like that's okay. If you want to push a vegan agenda, that's great, but you can't leave out high quality animal proteins and what that looks like. You can't leave out the deficiencies that can be developed being a vegan, like we touched on a little bit earlier. B12, zinc, omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, DHA. Like these are super important to human health. If you're going to lead people towards being a vegan, then you need to tell them, hey, here's where the dangers lie, and this is how you do it properly. Not everybody can sustain this. I actually interviewed Casey, the owner of SF Raw, who's a vegan, who's been a vegan for, I think, like 20 plus years. And I mean, the first thing that she says is not everybody can sustain a vegan diet and feel good and be healthy. It's again, the human body's not binary. So my hopes with this documentary is to kind of put all the facts out there and allow people to make their own choice. And also kind of follow my own journey. I'm gonna dive into the subjects of the environment, what the sustainable. I mean, some of these farms are claiming to be sustainable that are grass feeding. Is that really any different? Are they actually giving back to the environment? I don't know. Animal cruelty. I'm going to look into just the whole ethical side of things and the differences there between factory farming. And I'm actually planning to do a 90-day, I'm going to go vegan for 90 days myself. And I'm going to do all my blood work beforehand. I'm going to do a DEXA scan for body composition. And I'm going to see how myself as an athlete can sustain a vegan diet for 90 days. Will my blood numbers change? Will my body composition change? Will I lean out? Will I lose muscle? All the questions that people are concerned with, I'll be the guinea pig. So it's going to be quite a large undertaking.
Yeah, that's exciting. Can't wait to see it.
I'm into it.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all the time that we have. I want to thank you for being on the podcast. And when that documentary comes out, send me a link to it. We'll link it up for you. We'll link up your website, all that good stuff. And for those that are interested in contacting you, what's the best way?
Best way to contact me is via email, and it's really easy. It's nutritionwithryan@gmail.com. It's all spelled out.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, brother, man. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you again for listening. Thank you to our guest, Ryan Meyer. This was a very informative episode. Go follow his website for more information on his services. And thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please go rate the podcast and don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, or share. I really, really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.